So yes, I am outraged. I'm outraged at the fact that the Biden regime has decided that they're going to give $55 billion over a 3-year time frame to Africa. Now, don't get me wrong. I appreciate the fact that they recognize what they have done to the continent. What I can appreciate, though, is that you're willing to give up $55 billion in an apology for taking my ancestors from Africa to America, enslaving them, diminishing the ability for Africa to grow into what it should already be right now. Not what it's becoming right now, what it should already be. I have problems with that. We're going to discuss those problems for a few minutes here. And I will go ahead and say, if this video goes more than 10 minutes, which it probably will, you will be able to see the entirety of the video on my YouTube channel, which I'll have displayed here or somewhere within wherever you're watching it. Now, here's the thing. Please like and subscribe to the channel as well. I know that the majority of my conversation on this channel has something to do with black people especially, but people walking away from religion and how religion has been one of the most detrimental things that black people have ever experienced. Equal to that, if not worse or more so, was the chattel slavery that happened during the transatlantic slave trade, as well as the trans-Saharan slave trade, but especially during the transatlantic slave trade, to which my ancestors had the unfortunate experience of. But that experience didn't just stop with the ending of the Civil War, with the Emancipation Proclamation, with the 13th Amendment, but it continued through Jim Crow laws and other laws that were perpetuated by the United States that continue to keep black people in America as financial slaves, as societal slaves in this country. And those effects are still reigning today. Many white people will come on here and they will say that my ancestors did absolutely not, well, not their ancestors, that they themselves, and even some will say their ancestors didn't own slaves. Their ancestors didn't participate in those types of atrocities, but your ancestors did, whether they did so with authority or they did so with the willingness to accept the program that the government pushed out in order for your ancestors to be able to have the status that they have today. You may look at your own status right now and say that I'm no more wealthier than any other black person walking around. But your status and your opportunities has, well, your status right now has nothing to do with it, but it's the opportunities that were afforded to you that were not afforded to my ancestors. You want to go, President Biden wants to go and pay reparations to Africa. What about here? What about at home? What about the ancestors of those who have been blighted by this country from its inception? What about the Native Americans who were blighted? Not the ones who became the 5 civilized tribes, who then adopted Western culture, adopted Western speech, adopted Western religions, but the ones who were also enslaved, the ones who were also treated with the blatant disrespect of being dehumanized by this country. President Biden said something to the effect of the original sin of America in its participation with the chattel slavery, the raping of Africa. Now we know that this $55 billion, it will go to the African Union. Some of it will help the average African person. A lot of it will not. We know that there are people in place in every government, and let me be specific, every government where there is corruption, every program where it never actually does what it is intended to do. You're putting that money towards health care in Africa. You're putting that money towards infrastructure in Africa. I even saw one where it's putting the money into space agencies in Africa. Do you think Africa needs or are concerned with space agencies right now? Hell no. You had an African event where you invited these African leaders here with no agenda, barking to them what you want your policies to be to them, instead of them coming to the table equally. Sure, you said you invited them to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. You're inviting them to become members of the G20. It's a start. I'm not saying it's all bad, but what you have done in this country, you still have reparations that can be taken care of here. Let me ask you a question, America. Are there currently, to this day, white Americans who benefited from Jim Crow? White Americans who benefited from the expansion of the U.S. highway system? White Americans who benefited from the FHA loan programs that denied black people from buying homes? In America, we know that the first step to building wealth is purchasing your own home. It is an immutable law of money that you make the place that you live into an investment. And yet, you may say your ancestors didn't own slaves, but your ancestors were able to buy homes for $10,000, $20,000 in the 1940s and 50s, and those homes are worth $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. Now, they've used those homes to be able to fund your education. Are there generations of those people still alive? Are there generations of people who were affected by Tulsa still alive? Are there generations of people who were affected by the flooding of Lake Lanier still alive? Yes, they are. And if those people who are black and Asian who were in concentration camps during World War II are still alive, then the people who made those policies are still alive. If those people are still alive, if our people are still alive, your people are still alive. And some of them are still making policy to this day. So let's talk about some of the things, because you're going to say that no, you're going to have your I feel like and I feel like. But let's get some, as people like to say, receipts on the matter. So let's talk about America's original sin and continued sin and lack of true repentance. We can call it reparations, but if America want to deem itself a Christian country, true repentance is not, I'm sorry. True repentance is to go and fix the issue. It's to say that if I stole your wealth, then I'm going to not have my wealth until I've given you back your wealth. So let's look at the wealth that America has stolen from the average black person and other people of color. Although America did not commit themselves to the Holocaust, they did not build concentration camps for the Jewish people, but yet America paid reparations to those people. America did not they paid reparations to the former slave owners. Those slave owners lost their property, my ancestors, people. And money was paid to them in reparations to the former slave owners of the South. But nothing was paid to the former slaves. The Freeman Bank was created for slaves to be able to have a banking system. And yet they weren't given loans. Those loans were given out to white people. The list can go on, but we're going to first talk about the FHA. Oh, let me add, when the Japanese were placed in internment camps during World War II, those people received reparations. My people did not. You destroyed Tulsa, and reparations are not paid. And you came back and you destroyed it again. We're going to talk about those things as we go through here. But first, let's look at housing, because housing, other than your own personal budget, housing is the first big step in your personal finances and your ability to build wealth for generations. The FHA, Federal Housing Administration, in 1933, because there was a shortage of homes and they wanted to move lower and middle class white people out into the suburbs and purchase homes so that they can start generating wealth, went out and gave home loans just to white people. Actually had it in their contract where they said that these loans cannot be given to black people, that their homes would not be insured by the FHA. And since their homes were not insured by the FHA, companies would not give loans, banks, mortgage companies will not give loans out to black people. To further damage the opportunity, they began redlining. What is that, you may ask? Redlining is when they moved white people out of the white impoverished area, the white slums, the white housing projects. They decided that they would draw red lines around neighborhoods of what they called undesirables of black communities. And they said if you lived within this community, the FHA would not finance you a home. Even if the home was outside of that community, we're not going to finance you a home. Most of those homes outside those communities were white-owned homes and white neighborhoods, to which in the 1930s and 40s and 50s and into the 60s, black people were not allowed to buy homes in those neighborhoods. So it prevented black people from being able to get guaranteed loans to purchase their homes. And we know that with the laws of money, as I said before, making your home an investment is one of those things. It's one of those primary things. So by redlining black communities, you prevented them from being able to, black families from being able to build wealth at the same pace. And even when we did build wealth in areas, you decided that you're going to find other ways to get rid of us. Sure, you can point to the 1968 Fair Housing Acts, but those red lines were still there, and they're still there today. Up until 2020, did you know that Wells Fargo Bank denied black people more than 50% to purchase or refinance their homes, while white people were approved up and over 72%. Most of it is because of redlining, because you decided that you're not going to insure the loans of black people, but to insure the loans of white people. A little more so than Asians and a little more so than anybody else, but you made sure that black people homes would not be insured by FHA, thereby giving the banks the leeway to deny us mortgages for home ownership, so that 10, 20, 30 years from now, we can use our homes to provide education for our children without getting into student loan debt. Do you know that 95% of black people are still paying off student loans after 10 years, whereas 95% of white people are no longer paying off student loans? This also goes into opportunities in the job market. But it's also the higher interest rates. Is the fact that black people are forced, more so than white people, to have to get student loans. But you did own slaves. So why should reparations go to black people? Even to this day, a black person's home could be the exact same home, the exact same builder. But because of redlining, because of your system, a black person's home ranges around $48,000 less in value than a white person's home. This is why a person like myself, who actually holds a real estate license, you often have to tell a black person, take down any pictures or things that may let people know this home is owned by a black person. Because when the appraiser sees that, they're going to lower your appraisal rating. This is the systemic racism that exists. That is a holdover from the chattel slavery, from your Jim Crow laws, from the 400-year head start that you have had. And Biden wants to go and give Africa $55 billion when there's still a lot of work to be done at home. When we look at communities that were thriving, but what destroyed those communities? For the most part, flooding and the U.S. highway system. Growing up here in Atlanta, I always knew of Oscarville, Georgia. Oscarville, Georgia, you now call Lake Lanier, was a thriving black community. But one man and two teenagers were accused of raping a white girl. The man, Robert Edwards, was dragged out of the jail. He was beaten with crowbars, and he was hung and killed and murdered by the Night Riders, which is basically the KKK. The teenagers, Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel, were tried and convicted in the same day, and then were given a death sentence by hanging, and were hung. After that, these night riders went into Oscarville, forced everybody to leave their homes, forced them to leave their churches, and then subsequently, the community was flooded. And now y'all just float around Lake Lanier, having fun. Oh, the joy. It's such a prosperous white community up at Lake Lanier. And oftentimes people don't even know there's an entire town buried, well, flooded up under Lake Lanier. Similar thing happened in Benson, Alabama. You had a black man, William Benson. He had his son, John Benson. John went to go find his sister after slavery so that they can reunite their family. Mr. William Benson bought land, thousands of acres, sold it to black people. It was prosperous. Built schools, built churches, schools for black people. It was called Callawegla, Alabama at the time. But after William Benson died, they shut down the school. And Alabama decided to flood that community, and they created Lake Martin. Susanna, Alabama, right next door, because of the flooding of Lake Martin, 900 bodies had to be removed from the cemeteries, and that town was flooded as well. This town had a grits mill, it had 2 mercantile plants, had gold mines, had a flour mill, a sawmill, schools, shops, churches, all things that a thriving black community was prospering for. But they ensured that that town was flooded as well, so that you can have Lake Martin. A lot of you may know of Seneca Village in New York. It's now called Central Park. Seneca Village was destroyed in 1957 because in the 1940s, when black people were living there and thriving and owned their homes 5 times more so than the average other person in New York, they decided to destroy this black community in order to build your Central Park. Even in Vanderport, Oregon, when World War II happened and the white people left and they had a shortage of labor, black people migrated there, built that town. And then when a flood happened, they didn't warn the black people so that they can have time to get out. They allowed those families to be flooded. 18,000 families were flooded out of Vanderport, Oregon, and then reconstituted back to white people. You say America hasn't done anything since slavery, that your families weren't a part of it. They may not have been directly. But many of those families who lost their homes, lost their communities during the U.S. highway construction from the 1950s, initiated by Dwight Eisenhower, up through the 1970s. Their homes, their communities were destroyed. Black people were cut off from resources based on the U.S. highway system. The man in charge out of New York, what was his name? Let me find his name real quick. Robert Moses. Oh, he parted the Red Sea. He parted black people from white people. Parted black people out of the opportunity to continue to have prosperous neighborhoods by ensuring that the highway system went straight through their communities. This happened in multiple cities: Miami, New York, Chicago, Minnesota, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh, Oakland, Nashville, Baltimore, here in Atlanta. The U.S. Highway I-20, Interstate I-20, was a road that clearly was set up to divide black people and white people in the city of Atlanta and keep black people out of downtown Atlanta. My pappy, who has passed on now, used to tell me how he was part of that work crew. And it wasn't until they was building the road that he realized what they were actually doing, that they were dividing and cutting off black people. They were building walls to keep black people out. And instead of moving black people through the FHA into housing, they instead herded black people into urban project buildings. And they allowed white people to buy the housing. You see, the both worked in concert with each other. So when the highway system came into Miami, I-95 in Overton, Florida, Overtown in Miami, outside of Miami, it was the little Harlem of the South. It was the little Broadway of the South. And when they destroyed over 87 acres of those people's community in order to build I-95, when those people needed to relocate, when out of 48,000 people, when 40,000 people who were prosperous wanted to relocate, they couldn't buy homes in the suburban prosperous areas, but they were only able to get homes in the lower income areas that were already facing issues. Only 8,000 people remained in Overtown, but they forced them into a lower income area so that their housing value was less, their wealth was less. Rondo in St. Paul, Minnesota. You even had a mixed class, but they destroyed 600 businesses and 600 families and 300 businesses in order to build your I-94. Syracuse, New York. They literally said in the construction of the highway, we want to keep black people away from the jewels of Syracuse, which was Syracuse University and their downtown area. And they made sure that they bulldozed right through the prosperous black communities. Nashville, Birmingham, Alabama did the same thing to try to destroy the black communities. And Tulsa, if 1922 wasn't enough, when the black people came back and rebuilt Tulsa, the construction of I-24 and US 75 completely demolished the remaining areas of Tulsa in 1971. That's the year I was born. And with redlining, could those people get a home that was equal to the value that they had before? No. So their wealth is cut. Their ability to pass along generational wealth is cut. You talk about America's first sin. America has been in a perpetual state of sin. President Biden, he ran as a Democrat, claiming that you are for the people. At least the Republicans are straight up and tell you that they don't give a shit about the people. But what are you really doing? How does you go into Africa and giving them $55 billion? Help black people in America. And do not say that we have the equal opportunity. We don't. We do not. To this day, it is still easier for a white person to get a home loan than it is for a black person. And I can be more qualified than that white person, and I still won't get it as easy as it is for the white person. I have to be even more qualified in order to get it. But one thing I must say, power is never given up easily. Of course they would go to Africa, because they're going to Africa because they know Africa is the next big boom. They're not going to Africa for the African sake, for the sin that they committed, to try to bring about some level of repentance. No, they know that African countries that are independent, that are growing, that are thriving, that they are doing deals with whomever has the best deal for them. And lately, it's been China and Russia. The enemy of your enemy is my friend. And many of you are going to say, well, China is taking over Africa and Russia is taking over Africa. What do you think the Africans are supposed to do? In order to lift themselves up, just like when Japan came out of 264 years of isolation, they brought in people from all over the world over a 30-year period to lift themselves up so that they can be self-sustaining, so that they can catch up to the world. Africa is catching up to the world. So of course they're taking the best deals that they can get. And trust and believe, the Europeans are trying to stifle them, trying to lower the credit rating for countries like Ghana that said, hey, African diaspora, come back home. We'll give you citizenship. Zimbabwe, hey, come. We'll give you land if you cultivate it with the Zimbabwe tribes and chieftains. Will help us build Zimbabwe. They're asking for us to come. And they got to put a stop to that. So they're trying to lower their credit. They will do what they can to keep them off base. So yes, Africa, go to China, go to Russia, get what you need, build your infrastructure, build up your own people, and then kick them out, just as I've seen some countries have done. Come on in. You can build our infrastructure. Oh, we got it now. We taught our people how to do it. Now you get the hell out. Because now we are self-sufficient. We can do it ourselves. Oh, it's a fight. It's a fight. They ain't gonna just give up power. They ain't gonna just give up power in America either. So this is where the black Americans, we have to step in. We can ask and beg for reparations, but do you really think the United States government is ever going to pay reparations to the former Native Americans and former descendants of slaves? Hell no. Think they want to let black people come on equal footing with them? Hell no. One group has to be up, one has to be down in their mind. But in my mind, we don't have to oppress another group in order to rise up. That's not our thinking. Should not be their thinking. But for those who are the elite, that is their thinking. The first time white people in Europe realized that, hey, we subjugated our own people, but now we realize that there are more people of color in this world than we are. So let's tell our people we subjugated, no, you're better than them because you're white. And in the 1600s, they created racism. They created race just for that purpose. Because in their mind, subjugation was the way. And that elite status has continued. Subjugation is the way. Unfortunately, some people of color in other countries have developed that same mentality. Subjugation is the way. Some people, black people in America, has developed that consciousness that subjugation is the way. But it is not. If America truly wanted to be a great country, it would realize that America can be great if it just allowed people to prove how valuable they are to the marketplace, how valuable they are to the country. Would not America be a greater place if the majority of its citizens were middle class and above? America is a country that actually has the ability to have so much wealth that the majority of the population could be upper middle class and above. But that means you have to loosen some of your control, and they're not going to give that up easily. I'm not going to give up my entire plan. I talked about a plan before, but I've made adjustments since then. We have to take financial literacy into our own hands. That's one of the things. And we can't wait for the government to do anything for us. Our voting is not going to help us. We've been voting and voting and voting, and where has it gotten us? A couple of laws here and there. Financially, it hasn't gotten us anywhere. I would say that those black communities back in the day were in a better situation than we are today because the majority of those people own their homes, whereas the majority of us today, we do not own our home. We do not have more than $1,000 in our bank account. Financial literacy is a must. And then we have to create and build our own communities, strengthened by the businesses and churches and schools and synagogues and mosques. I know I'm not a proponent of religion, but since the majority of you follow religion, we have to build through those entities. But we can't do it waiting and begging for the United States government to be that great white savior that comes and lifts us up. It has to be done through our own abilities, in defiance of what they are trying to stop us doing. And are they going to stop? Of course. Try to stop us? Of course. Of course. We have to recognize that our enemy is not the average white person. Our enemy is the United States government, the elites that run it, who are in a perpetual state to keep a divide, just as the European lords and ladies and those who own the fiefdoms utilize poor white people to divide from poor black people or people of color in other countries. And all of them weren't poor, don't get me wrong. They were thriving countries. They just didn't have the technology that the Europeans had because they didn't have a need for it. They didn't have a need for it. It wasn't about brain power. It was about need. What grows in Europe? What do you mine in Europe? What does Europe provide to the world? Nothing. Colonization, potatoes, nothing. The resources of the world is in every other continent but that one. So to dominate those continents was the goal. To usurp the resources in those continents. That's the goal. And in order to maintain that, they have to continue to usurp those resources. The greatest resources is the people. It's the people. In today's age, it's the people. Because if the people aren't in the right mindset, we cannot utilize those resources So we have to build our own brain trust, our own ability to finance each other's loans, to finance what we want to do, what we need to do in order to come up. Yeah, it's a pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps mentality, because I ain't waiting on nobody to do it for us. So I'll leave you with this. I'm not in a position, I don't have the right people around me right now. Some are present, but we'll grow. But there's a way to systematically uplift black people and around this country. And if President Biden, you want to sit down and talk to me about it, and I show you how to do this, but if you're earnest about it, if the white elites who run the government are earnest about it, I can show you how America can become a great country. How America can become a country where people are treated fairly and equally. Where the stigma of racism, the stigma of slavery becomes something of our distant past. But in order to do that, you have to be willing to allow people to develop to their highest potential. And that's my question for all of you who are Democrats, all of you who continue to vote Democrats. Are you truly of the mindset that you want the best for this country? Because every empire has always shown that when the divide between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots, become too great, the people will revolt. And that nation will change. That nation will no longer be its former self. The question is having all the power more important than just having slightly advantage of power, so that the people are not as downtrodden, that the people are not as aggravated? You want a French Revolution and off with your heads? Keep going on with the same process you're doing. You want a solution that opens the doorway so that people can actually grow and become the greatest version of themselves? Come talk to me. But if you don't, which I don't expect any of you to do so, I do it my damn self. But when I do it, it ain't gonna be about your people. It's gonna be about my people. And I know with the laws that we have today, I can't exclude people. But those people that I don't exclude, they're gonna have an understanding of who it's really about. It ain't really about them. And over these 20, 30 years, because things happen faster nowadays than they did before, you'll see a revolution. But like Japan said after World War II, it's no longer a physical war that we're fighting, but it's an economic war that we're fighting. You'll see. You can either be with me or you're against me. If you're against me, that's your problem, not mine. Yeah, it's a target. Paint a target on my back. Think about it, I don't care. I really don't. I'm only going to be in this country for so long. But that's not going to stop the impact that I have on this country. And that's actually one of the purposes for me leaving this country, is so that that impact can grow and be beyond just what goes on in America. Stop being humans. Let's become people. Without borders, without race, without all these different things that divide us. And just be the spiritually divine, energetic beings that we are. But America, chickens are going to come home to roost. You're headed for a downfall. A big downfall. And unlike most people, I believe I'll see it in my lifetime. So for those who rock with me, y'all be great. Remember, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.